Hey, so in today's episode, crackers. And yes, a cracker is a kind of bread, and it can be eaten with different toppings or just by itself. So today I'll show you how to make these seeded wholemeal crackers. It takes hardly any effort at all. All you need is time for the dough to rest. So let's start with the equipment you'll need. A tray lined with parchment paper, a bowl for making your dough in, as always scales for weighing, a rolling pin to roll your crackers nice and thin, the ever essential bread making tool, the dough scraper, although this time it wasn't that much needed, and also a fork, more on this later. So now to the ingredients. You'll need wholemeal flour, white flour, water, olive oil, some sea salt and some seeds of your choice. So before we begin, let's clean down. So to start, get your bowl, add your water and then the salt and give it a good mix. You want to dissolve the salt flakes, otherwise it'll be harder to work them into the dough later on. Once you're happy with that, add your olive oil. And now on to the flour. This is quite a dry dough. It's only 58% hydration in baker's percentage, so it will be quite easy to work with. You want to give it a good mix until you don't see any more dry flour, and then tip it out on your table and start kneading it. Now, contrary to what I've said in my previous videos of adding the fat or the oil at the end of the dough mixing process, this time we added it straight at the beginning. The reason for that is that we don't want too much gluten development, because gluten will hinder the rolling of the dough. We want it to be nice and loose. So in this case, it's okay to add the oil right at the beginning. You want to work this dough for about 5 minutes until moderate gluten development. I'm using my preferred kneading method here. I'm pressing down and forwards with the heel of my right hand, and using the fingers of my left hand, I fold the piece of dough underneath the heel of my right hand, and repeat. Once you've done this a few times, it will become second nature. Now you can see there's some gluten development. It's not great, but that's what we want. The dough has just come together nicely. All you need to do now is collect it into a little bowl, and it will be ready for dividing and shaping. I'm not going to use scales this time because I'm just cutting the dough in half, so that's quite easy to eyeball. If one piece is bigger than the other, that's no big deal. So just cut them in half and shape them by pulling the sides into the center and going around in a circle until you reach the point where you started. And you should always end up with the dough smooth side up. And this applies to any dough really. You want the smooth side facing up because that's a pretty side. Now place your dough balls on a tray or on a plate, cover them with cling film, and let them rest in the fridge for 1.5 to 2 hours. You can also let them rest for longer, it's up to you, but this is like the minimum, for the gluten to be relaxed enough for rolling. Now after a while we can see that the dough has become nice and soft and stretchy. And stretchy is the key word. Normally we're looking for elastic dough, but this time we want stretchy because we want to stretch it out as much as possible. And now we are ready to shape our crackers, or to roll them out I should say. Dust your work surface and your dough lightly with flour, just to make it easier to work with so it doesn't stick to the table. Pat it out with your fingertips into the approximate shape, this will make it easier to roll. And then just grab your rolling pin and start working. You want to roll it until it's the size of your sheet pan, and also to around 2 millimeters in thickness, so you want it quite thin. The thinness is what makes the crackers crispy. Because the dough is so thin, you'll let the water evaporate while it's baking. If your dough is too thick, it will be more bready and chewy in texture. I should add that using a larger rolling pin will make it much easier to roll this dough out, but I still made it work. Always make sure you dust the surface and the dough lightly with flour once in a while, otherwise it will stick to the table and it will roll out unevenly. Now at this point I can see that the dough is quite big, and I can check with my parchment paper if I rolled it out to size. And it might need just a little bit more rolling. So dust up again and keep at it. Now once you're happy with the size and the thickness of your dough, you can cut it down to fit your tray. Here I'm just using my dough scraper to cut it down to size. And then I'll just trim the edges just a little bit more to make it fit the paper a little bit better. There's by no means a need for all this cutting and shaping and making it look pretty. I just did it for the video. Texture and flavor are the two most important things in this. As long as you have made your dough the correct way, rolled it out and rested it, then you can make it look whichever way you like. You can keep it rustic, but you can do super professional. You can cut it into little star shapes for all I care. That is totally up to you. But this time, I just made it into little triangles. I like to score the dough before baking. That makes it easier to cut or break up later on when it's finished baking. And now we're going to use our fork. This is used to poke the dough to basically stop it from bubbling up whilst it's baking. This step can also be skipped. All that will change is that the dough will puff up slightly whilst baking, but that's up to you. So once you've finished poking your dough with a fork, or docking as it's called in baker's terms, you can rest it again for 30 minutes in the fridge. This will prevent it from changing shape while baking. And now we can preheat our oven to 220 degrees Celsius, no fan. To fully preheat your oven, it should be on for like 40 minutes to an hour at least. So half an hour later we can finish dressing up our crackers. But what I did here is brush them with water lightly so the toppings would stick to it better. Sprinkle with some sea salt and a generous helping of mixed seeds. And if you want to, you can just leave them plain and bake them straight from the fridge. But I like to add a lot of seeds just to pretend that they're healthy. What I like to do to make the seeds stick a little bit better is to press them lightly into the dough using the palm of my hand. And now we're ready to bake. 12 to 14 minutes later, they're ready. Now I like to cut them up whilst they're still warm, because as they cool down they'll get super crispy and brittle and just break when you try to cut them. If you score them slightly deeper before baking, you can just snap them apart. I would suggest cooling them down completely before eating or storing them, because when they are still warm they'll be soft and bendy, but crackers should be dry and crispy, right? And that's it, as easy as that. Get some cream cheese, some pate, whatever you like, or just eat them naked. And as always, if you got any questions, write them down in the comments. I'll make sure to answer every one of them. If you got any suggestions, also let me know. And if you want to see more videos like these, subscribe because I'll be posting every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, and if you got too many crackers, store them in an airtight container. They will go a little bit stale. To make them crispy again, pop them in the oven for a few minutes.